I see them as a resource more to the Department of Public Works and Public Safety,
Mhm.
rather than directly to this board. I mean, the only time that I can foresee things coming to this board is as far as prioritization of projects when it comes to the capital budget and things of that nature. The long-range planning of what our community's gonna look like several years down the road really does come under the planning commission. That's why they call it the planning commission. We certainly have input, but their role under the charter is that venue. And just looking at, you're giving the CPC a voting member, Board of Selectmen non-voting member. I don't know why. I don't know why one elected board would have a voting status and one other elected board would not.
So your suggestion is that the liaison should be a voting member?
No, not necessarily.
That's what I'm asking. You,
First of all, you're creating a committee here that starts to get a little bit unruly as far as the size of it. I mean, you're talking about 1, 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, and add the police, that's 11 members, as suggested, and could continue to grow. I mean, to me, the department heads and or whoever the designees are going to be from the town departments, will play a vital role in advising the Citizen Advisory Committee as to what can and can't be done and what's, feasible in relation to any upcoming projects that are on the drawing board, timelines associated with things, probably financing it, things of that nature. So
would you say such a committee would be a great resource for the CPC?
I would see it as more of a resource to the planning commission as they look forward
Mhm.
to how they're going to lay out, or any suggested bylaw changes, and whether you're talking about allowing developments that are gonna have a higher density going forward, as the town grows and space is less available, how are we gonna address those sorts of things? If you have any more plan unit developments coming in, 40Bs, or things of that nature, how do we address it? Certainly, it's a resource. I mean, it'll be a wonderful resource, but as far as the makeup, 11 people, probably. It's gonna be difficult to get everybody together unless people can meet during the day, because what we're calling upon is, remember the DPW, police department. I don't know, it starts to get unruly as it gets
Well,
larger.
So then are you suggesting that it be smaller and?
LUC, LUC, as far as the role that they play, Land Utilization Committee, why would they be a voting member?
My intent with having them involved was because they are in the process of setting up trails throughout town. There are a variety of various properties that they are working on, and we could possibly work in conjunction with them.
It's okay.
All right, and they can work in conjunction with us, share ideas with us. If
Does it necessitate a seat at the table and a vote? When they're already planning this thing. We start to get rather redundant on things. I mean, if we can dovetail interests, that's great. But if we start to get redundant, that's exactly what it is.
Well,
It's redundant.
if there's an overlap and an interaction, I don't know if it's redundant, it's committees weaving together and working together. That's how I'm seeing that.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have an issue or a concern with whether the LUC is there or
If you
not.
want to have a pedestrian safety advisory committee, that's fine. And they have a mission and a purpose.
Mhm.
And then if it happens to coincide with what the land utilization committee comes under their purview, what they're doing, that's good. There should be communication there.
Mhm.
There shouldn't necessarily be a seat at the table. The planning commission has that responsibility already. They should not necessarily have a seat at the table and a vote. I don't, to me, let the committee do its job, get its mission statement, finally honed here, to ensure that it's not necessarily usurping any other committee. I mean, it can work with and dovetail with, but not necessarily usurp or supplant what's already supposed to be done. I see, I see this as an augmentation, not a supplanting of a responsibility of taking over either. So I think we have to be a little bit careful of that. So if we want to have a small citizens committee with representatives of the business community, because they're certainly impacted by it, and again, in both a positive and a negative way, and I think it's all more positive than negative. Obviously, there's a cost associated with maintaining, the property in front of the sidewalks in front of the property and all the rest, but certainly pedestrian traffic is important to them and good for their businesses. If you're going to get into neighborhood responsibilities where people and homeowners, residential homeowners, are going to be responsible for, pedestrian walkways and maintaining of that in front of their houses, then we have an awful lot to discuss, because a lot of people are going to want to talk about that,
Yeah, and the idea would be to put it out there and to see how it can be accomplished, how the goals can be accomplished, if they are. It's one thing to come up with an idea and once you, in a room, and we do this all the time. We sit in a room by ourselves, we come up with an idea, and then we tell the public, and then they tell us what they think. All right, the same thing would apply to the advisory committee. We'd come up with an idea.
You just asked me about the membership. So again, I think the membership, I think it's important to have resources within town hall as advisory members of this committee.
Okay.
This advisory committee, but I think the recommendations coming out of the committee should come from a smaller group. And again, and the citizens advisory members, can necessarily, I have no problem with them disagreeing with what the administration input would be. I don't mind hearing that
Right.
kind of discussion. And maybe other members feel differently. I don't think that we should necessarily weigh the board down with administrative personnel or elected board members to make sure that there's a weighted vote one way or the other if we think that we're all gonna be like-minded.
Right.
Let's let some free thinking take place, let them take the input, have the resources available, but again, make sure that it's their recommendations and not necessarily heavily weighted in favor of people who are already serving on elected or appointed boards and serving in an official capacity for the town.
I mean, it's a point well taken. I think if you're saying to us that that you would not need DPW or the CPC as voting members on the board, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. Or if you said at the LUC, I'm also in your suggesting that it's a good idea. I guess I'm also looking for, okay, if it is a good idea, what's the best way to make it work? I thought about what I could think of. I also looked for members of the committee to work together and come up with an additional suggestion and saying, this would really work and we can really go forward with this idea. All right? So if you're saying to me, if your suggestion is to shrink it by taking out the LUC, DPW, and the CPC as voting members, I don't have a problem with that, because I want it to work. That's the whole idea. I want it to work. And, Joe felt that the police, it's advantageous to have the police department
Yeah.
involved with this.
I think it would.
All right, and suggestions are always taken. That's very important. So I don't have, I'm okay with the idea of making it smaller. I'm okay with that idea. Sean, what?
I would make it smaller. I'd cut out those particular members, LUC, DPW, and CPC. I'd have a representative from the police department. I don't know if necessarily needs to be a voting member, but I think a smaller, more finite set of people would be best. Gets a little unwieldy when you get up to larger numbers. That's my suggestion.
The other advantage to trimming it down a little will be, as time goes on, it'll be easier to get a quorum.
Yeah,
Because, as we know, we can have problems getting quorums on any and all committees. So it will be easier for you to get a quorum, too.
You can still get input from LUC, DPW, and CPC
Right,
without having them
right.
being members of the committee or even voting members.
Yeah, I think it's
I agree with
important
that.
that, I think it's important that if it's gonna be trimmed down, that the people that we've talked about, as far as DPW, CPC, police, whoever else we think, should be included in, requesting that the other elected boards, because we don't have any say over that, have a liaison. LUC, which the town administrator appoints, again, suggest strongly that they appoint a liaison that's gonna be active with the committee to make sure that it does work. And, initially getting off the ground here, it's gonna require more work on the part of the liaisons to get things up and going and get all the ideas out onto the table and talked about.
And,
So I don't think it's a bad idea to mention all these groups or organizations as to who we think should have liaisons to this organization. But again, that could grow based upon, again, you don't have the school department mentioned here. And walking to schools is kind of important.
Mhm.
Why
It's
wouldn't
also a
they
cost factor too.
Right.
For the schools,
Yeah.
where there is, they're automatically busing people in areas where they don't feel it's safe to transport, for walkers, even if they may be within.
So anyway, my suggestion, again, is to pare it down and give it a little more thought, back with the recommendation as to, what it should be. I don't know if I want to make a decision tonight, because it might not be the right, well-thought-out decision. But I mean, bring it back, a couple of weeks or something, whatever, and with a more concrete position as to how we really want to see
Well-
it form.
Well, I guess the only part that you're looking to solidify here is the committee membership. Correct? Everything else is fine from what I'm understanding.
Well, other than, I've heard a very broad number of ideas expressed, for which I think some of the other organizations that we have in town, whether it be the planning commission, the land utilization committee, who are already working on certain things, the DPW that has to talk about it anyway. Again, I just want to make sure, and again, maybe we need to, again, the mission statement appears to be okay, but I think it crosses a number of lines with other boards, committees, commissions, and
I think,
Public
Steve,
officials.
I think if you take out the trails, because there's an organization dealing with that, and we're dealing with sidewalks, crosswalks, intersections, roads, and streets. It's the North Reading Pedestrian Safety Advisory Committee. I view the trails as something different.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and the way I would interject is that with how the trails are being defined wherever they are, is how do you get there? That's the issue in regards to the access to where the trail is. For example, Bradford Pond off Marblehead Street. For most people who wanna get there, you have to drive, and there's one little parking spot to get
Mhm.
there. There's no real good access for the community to get to that beautiful area, unless you happen to live very, very close to it. Even then, trying to walk out Marblehead, where there's no sidewalks to get to that section, is not always
Yeah, but
the
that's,
safest way.
then again, that's,
Looking at the connection of where the trails are, regardless, how can we make it more connected that you don't have to drive to get there, or if there is areas that you can use the trails more efficiently for more people.
Yeah.
I see what you're talking about, but I think one of the problems that we've had in town is that one group's doing a little bit of this, one group's doing a little bit of that, and they never look at the whole picture in regards to how it's all connected. For example, the picture I had up at Piccadilly Pub, they needed an island in there so everybody makes a right-hand turn, not a left-hand turn. Well, they never looked at how they're constructing the island and how it doesn't meet accessibility requirements in regards to the island's there. It met that need of making those cars turn right and not taking that left-hand turn, but they didn't look at what else it was affecting. There was another point I was gonna say about that, but you look at different things. Oh, and when they did these, at